The Galactic Naval Academy's Advanced Tactical Simulation classroom fell into its usual pre-class chatter as cadets from across the known systems filed in. Zephyrian tentacles writhed in animated discussion. Korthak mandibles clicked in rhythmic laughter, and the crystalline Vexhide chimed their harmonic conversations. At the back of the room, Marcus Chen sat quietly at his assigned station, methodically arranging his data tablets and stylus with the same precision he applied to everything else. The other cadets barely acknowledged his presence. Humans were still relatively new to the Galactic Alliance, and most species considered them unremarkable. Average strength, average speed, average intelligence by galactic standards. Nothing special. "Look, it's the Silent Terran," chittered Zilthara, a Zephyrian whose purple skin shimmered with amusement. "Does it even know how to speak? Or does it just sit there computing basic mathematics?" Several nearby cadets joined in the snickering. Marcus didn't react, his dark eyes remaining focused on his preparation. This only encouraged them further. "I heard humans only use 10% of their brains," added Korath, the Korthak's serrated mandibles clicking with derision. "Explains why they're so slow to respond to everything." Professor Veltaran, a distinguished Altarian with 4 arms and scales that shifted color with his mood, entered the classroom. His scales showed the deep blue of focused concentration. "Settle down, cadets. Today we're running the Kepler Crisis Simulation, a real historical battle where a single tactical decision determined the fate of an entire star system." The holographic projectors hummed to life, creating a 3-dimensional battlefield in the center of the room. 2 fleets faced each other across the void, the hegemony's massive dreadnoughts against a smaller Alliance defensive force protecting a civilian evacuation. "The scenario," Professor Veltaran continued, "is based on actual events from the border wars. The hegemony fleet has superior numbers and firepower. The Alliance fleet must hold them off long enough for civilian transports to escape. You'll be working in teams of 4, each controlling a squadron of ships. You have 30 minutes. Cadets scrambled to form groups, gravitating toward friends and proven partners. Marcus found himself grouped with 3 others, who clearly drew the short straw. Ninth, a nervous Quellan whose translator kept malfunctioning. Zor, a hulking granite whose species was known more for strength than strategy. And Pip, a young Flixian who had barely passed basic navigation. "Great," muttered Pip, her bioluminescent spots dimming with disappointment. "We got the human." The simulation began. Across the room, other teams immediately launched into heated strategic discussions, their voices rising as they debated formation patterns and attack vectors. Marcus's team started similarly, Ninth suggesting a direct defensive line, Zor advocating for a ramming attack, Pip proposing they hide behind asteroids. Marcus listened to each suggestion, asked a few quiet questions, then spoke for the first time that day. His voice was calm, measured, and carried an odd certainty that made his teammates pause their arguments. "We're going to lose if we play this conventionally," he said simply. "Look at the parameters again." He manipulated the holographic display with practiced efficiency, highlighting energy readings, trajectory calculations, and temporal markers they had all missed in their eagerness to engage. "The civilian evacuation isn't random," Marcus continued, his fingers dancing across the controls as he traced flight paths through the 3D space. "They're following standard emergency protocols, predictable routes that the enemy will intercept in 14 minutes regardless of how long we delay them." His teammates leaned in despite themselves, watching as Marcus highlighted patterns in the enemy fleet's positioning. "But here," he said, pointing to a seemingly insignificant gravitational anomaly near a dying star, "the hegemony admiral has made an assumption. He's positioned his reserves based on our most likely defensive patterns that every military academy in the galaxy teaches." Ninth's translator finally caught up. "But if we don't follow standard doctrine, we get slaughtered," Zor finished, his granite-like features settling into a skeptical scowl. Marcus shook his head. "Not if we make them commit to their assumptions first." What happened next would be discussed in tactical analysis courses for decades to come. While every other team in the classroom fought desperately to delay the inevitable, Marcus orchestrated something different entirely. He had his team's ships assume a standard defensive formation, exactly what the enemy expected. The hegemony fleet moved to counter, deploying their reserves according to textbook strategy. Then, in a sequence of moves that seemed to violate every principle of space combat, Marcus's forces scattered. But it wasn't chaos. Each ship moved with surgical precision, using the gravitational anomaly as a slingshot to achieve impossible trajectories. What looked like a panicked retreat became a complex ballet of physics and timing. The hegemony fleet, committed to their counter-strategy, found themselves out of position as Marcus's forces used their apparent disadvantage, smaller, more maneuverable ships, to thread the needle through space-time itself. The civilian transports escaped. The hegemony fleet, caught in their own gravitational trap as their massive dreadnought's momentum carried them past the optimal firing positions, watched helplessly as their tactical advantage evaporated. The simulation ended. The classroom fell silent. Professor Velteran's scales had shifted to a color none of the students had seen before, a swirling pattern of silver and gold that spoke of profound surprise mixed with deep respect. "In 40 years of running this simulation," he said quietly, "that is the first time anyone has achieved total victory while preserving all civilian and military assets." The other teams stared at their displays. Some had managed partial successes, saving most of the civilians or inflicting heavy enemy casualties. None had achieved what Marcus's team just accomplished. "How?" whispered Zilthara, her earlier mockery forgotten. Marcus stood, gathering his tablets with the same quiet efficiency he'd shown at the start of class. "You were all thinking about how to fight the battle the enemy expected. I was thinking about how to fight the battle they weren't prepared for." He paused at the door, looking back at his stunned classmates. "Sometimes the best strategy isn't to be stronger or faster. Sometimes it's just to think differently." As the quiet human cadet walked out of the classroom, the silence stretched behind him. Nobody laughed. Nobody would laugh at a human again, at least not in Marcus Chen's presence. They were all too busy wondering what other assumptions they might have gotten wrong about these new allies from the small blue planet called Earth.